My name is Olivia Miles. I am 72 years old, and I used to be a seamstress. For 40 years, my hands shaped the fabric of my family. I never imagined those same hands would one day tremble like this. The incident happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was standing in the kitchen stirring a pot of vegetable soup. The broth simmered gently, releasing the familiar smell of onion and celery. Cooking always grounded me. Every slow circle of the ladle reminded me that I still had purpose. Mark, my son, sat in the living room. The television was loud, filling the house with forced laughter from a sitcom. Lila, my daughter-in-law, scrolled through her phone while recording herself. She always seemed to be performing for someone else. I was holding the ladle when she suddenly appeared behind me. She snatched it from my hand, slammed the metal against my head, and hissed, "Who cooks like that? Are you trying to embarrass me?" There was no warning. The loud metallic sting cracked against my skull. A wave of heat and shame flushed through me. My vision blurred. I gripped the counter to steady myself. The smell of soup mixed with the faint scent of burned metal. I looked toward Mark. He glanced at me, then turned the television volume higher. He did not speak. He did not move toward me. He chose silence. Lila tossed the ladle into the sink. The clash echoed in the kitchen like a shot in a cathedral. She walked back toward the living room, already composing another version of her life, one where I did not exist. I stayed still, breathing through the sting on my scalp. Years of swallowing pain had trained me well. I wiped the soup from the ladle off my forehead with a kitchen towel. The fabric smelled like lemon detergent. Silence is not peace. Sometimes silence is abandonment. I kept stirring the soup. My hands shook. The overhead light flickered. My reflection in the metal pot distorted. I was a ghost in my own home. Then Lila yelled again from the hallway, "Hurry up! I need to record a video. The kitchen is part of the background." I inhaled. I exhaled. I kept moving. But the moment I picked up the pot to carry it to the counter, the handle slipped. The pot crashed to the tiled floor. Scalding soup splattered across my legs. Bowls shattered. Porcelain pieces skidded across the floor like white shards of bone. The sound was violent. It pierced through the sitcom laughter. Mark finally turned his head. He ran in and froze at the doorway. His face went pale at the scene. Soup dripping from the cabinets, porcelain shards everywhere, and me, kneeling in the mess. He looked as if I had detonated a grenade in his perfect living room. "Mom, what did you do?" Not "Are you hurt?" Not "Let me help you?" Just that. Accusation. Blame. I could not speak. I simply stared at him. Right then, the sleeve of my sweater slid back, revealing the bracelet on my wrist. A thin, silver bangle. Arthur's gift on our 40th wedding anniversary. Engraved inside were the words, "You are the foundation of this family." My fingers closed around it. I lifted my head. My voice was steady, quiet, almost weightless. I used to be the foundation of this family. Mark blinked, confused. Lila appeared behind him, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. She chuckled. She dropped it because her hands were shaking. Maybe soup is too complicated for old people. My knees throbbed. Soup clung to my skin, yet all I felt was a deep, piercing clarity. In that moment, humiliation carved something open inside me. It made a space where dignity could finally breathe. I stood up slowly, my palms sticky with broth and shame. I touched the bracelet again. It felt cold against my skin, like the truth. Mark reached toward me, not out of care, but to avoid stepping on broken pieces. "Just get out of the way. We will clean it up." We, Lila and him, together, always together unless it involved me. His wife spoke again, dismissive. "Next time, do not try to help. You only make things worse." A part of me died. Not because of the insult, not because of the pain, but because my son did not defend me. There are wounds no one sees, not bruises, not cuts, but invisible fractures inside the heart. I took a slow breath. My knees steadied. Something inside me shifted. A boundary, a line, a truth. I will not stay where I am unwelcome. Lila rolled her eyes. "You live here for free. You should be grateful." My voice did not tremble. My presence should not be the price of your convenience. Mark opened his mouth. No words came. I walked to the sink, turned on the faucet, and rinsed my hands. The water washed away the soup and the years I had allowed myself to shrink. The silver bracelet glimmered under the kitchen light. My foundation was not gone. It had only been forgotten. Until now. Fade to black. If you are still here, thank you for listening. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter of Olivia's story. Your support helps these silent stories find the people who need them. When the soup cooled on the floor and silence filled the house, my mind drifted backward, to a time when the kitchen was a place of laughter and not of wounds. Memory has a way of softening edges, turning pain into light, at least for a moment. Arthur and I met when I was 19. He was a carpenter with kind eyes and a quiet voice that carried weight. People said we looked mismatched, his large hands rough with sawdust, my fingers thin and delicate from stitching gowns. But together, we built something gentle. He used to say, "You are the roof over my head, Olivia. You are my home." Every time he said it, I believed him a little more. We lived in a modest house on Elm Street, painted pale yellow, the kind of color that catches morning light. There was a porch swing Arthur built himself. On summer evenings, we sat there with lemonade, counting fireflies, while the neighborhood children played until the streetlights came on. It was a simple life, but it felt whole. After he passed, the house became too quiet. His chair remained by the window, a dent in the cushion where his weight used to be. The scent of pine from his tools lingered for months. I would walk past the workbench, see his half-finished projects, and my chest would tighten with the ache of something unfinished. People tell you grief fades. It doesn't. It just learns to whisper instead of scream. I filled my days with small rituals. I made tea every morning, poured it into the chipped cup he once bought at a flea market. I still set 2 places at the table for a long time out of habit. Each night I folded one of his shirts, carefully, as if the act itself could hold the memory together. That day when the decision came, the sky was the color of pewter. I was ironing one of Arthur's shirts, his favorite plaid one, when Mark called. His voice sounded strained, rehearsed. "Mom," he said, "you shouldn't be alone. It's not safe. Houses get broken into. What if you fall?" I told him I was fine. The neighbors checked in. Mrs. Ramirez brought soup sometimes, but he pressed on. "Just come live with us. It's better that way. Lila agrees." Lila agreeing should have been my first warning, but I wanted to believe my son's concern was love. That night, I sat at the edge of our bed. The sheets still smelled faintly of cedar and soap. Arthur's photo stood on the nightstand. His smile was steady, reassuring, as if even in death he knew I would hesitate. I whispered, "What should I do, Arthur?" In my heart, I imagined his answer. "Go where you're needed, Liv, but don't let them take your peace." The next morning, I started packing. I folded every shirt of his like a prayer. The plaid one, the denim one, the Sunday one with the missing button I never replaced. Each fold carried a memory. Our first anniversary dinner, the day he built Mark's crib, the time he danced with me in the kitchen just because a song came on the radio. As I closed each drawer, the sound felt final, like shutting chapters of a book only I had read. I wrapped the silver bracelet in tissue and slipped it into my purse. That bracelet had been his last gift before the hospital took him. Engraved on the inside were those words I could never forget. "You are the foundation of this family." Before leaving, I stood in the doorway one last time. Dust motes floated in the air, catching the light. I could almost hear Arthur humming as he sanded a piece of oak, the rhythm steady, patient. I smiled at the memory, but it felt like smiling at a photograph, something warm but unreachable. Mark arrived with his car trunk half full already, impatient. "Mom, let's go before it rains." I looked at the walls. Every nail hole, every faded mark from furniture, every scratch on the floor told a story. This house had seen my youth, my motherhood, my widowhood. It had been more faithful to me than most people. As I locked the door, my hand trembled, not from age, but from the realization that once I turned that key, I was no longer leaving a house. I was leaving myself behind. The drive to Mark's home took less than an hour, yet it felt like crossing continents. Lila greeted me with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Her lipstick was perfect, her phone in hand. She kissed the air near my cheek. "So glad you're here," she said flatly. "We cleared a space for you in the guest room." Space. Not a room, not a welcome, just space. Mark carried my boxes inside, avoiding eye contact. The air smelled like synthetic perfume and new furniture, sterile, impersonal. I missed the scent of wood and cinnamon. That night, I lay in the guest bed, staring at the ceiling. I could hear their laughter from the living room. Lila's voice rose above his, confident, commanding. My son's laugh sounded different, short, nervous, like a man performing contentment. I reached for the bracelet on my nightstand. My thumb traced the engraved words again and again until I fell asleep. In the following weeks, I tried to adjust. I cooked dinner sometimes, cleaned, folded laundry. Lila thanked me publicly on her social media, but privately corrected everything I did. Mark said nothing. One evening, Mrs. Ramirez called to check on me. She said she still kept my rosebush alive, watering it twice a week. I smiled through the phone, my eyes wet. "Thank you," I whispered. "It's good to know something of me still blooms there." After the call, I sat by the window and looked out at the manicured garden. The flowers there seemed too arranged, too perfect. Beauty without warmth. That was the night I realized my old house was not empty. It was full of echoes, full of love that still lingered in the walls. Here, in this bigger house, everything looked polished, but hollow. Mark's voice interrupted my thoughts. "Mom, don't stay up too late. Lila's filming early tomorrow. Try not to make noise." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. When the lights went out, I held the bracelet close to my heart. In that quiet darkness, I finally admitted what I'd been denying since Arthur's death. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of being forgotten while surrounded by people who called me family. I fell asleep with that truth heavy on my chest, unaware that it was only the beginning of the silence that would later define everything. The mornings in my son's house followed a strange rhythm, too quiet, yet somehow filled with tension. I would wake before sunrise, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the soft ticking of the kitchen clock, the distant echo of cars heading to work. I missed the sound of Arthur breathing beside me, the shuffle of slippers across old wooden floors. Here, everything gleamed, but nothing breathed. I tried to make myself useful. It is what mothers do. I wiped the counters, watered the plants, folded laundry before anyone asked. One morning, I decided to make pancakes. Mark used to love them when he was little. Thin and golden, drizzled with honey. I wanted to bring that memory back, even for a moment. As I whisked the batter, Lila walked in, phone in hand, her voice bright for the camera. "Good morning, my beautiful followers," she said. "We're starting the day with positive energy and clean living." Then she turned to me, the smile vanishing. "Oh, Mother Miles, you're using regular milk? We only use almond milk here." I froze, the whisk hovering mid-air. "I didn't know," I said softly. She sighed dramatically. "I keep telling you, check the fridge before cooking. You make me look careless." She wasn't talking to me. She was talking at me, the way people do when correcting a child. I nodded and poured the batter into the sink. When she left, I cleaned the counter again. My hands moved automatically, wiping invisible crumbs. I told myself, just try harder, Olivia. She's young. Maybe she'll warm up to you. The next day, I set the table for dinner. Forks on the left, knives on the right, napkins folded neatly. Lila came in and frowned. "We don't use those plates for dinner. Those are for display." "They look nice," I replied. "I thought—" She cut me off. "Thought isn't needed. Just ask next time." Her tone was sharp enough to slice through air. I felt my shoulders tense. Mark entered a moment later, glanced at her expression and stayed silent. He kissed her cheek, as if that could erase the discomfort hanging between us. Dinner was served. Lila laughed too loudly, Mark chewed too quietly, and I focused on the bracelet circling my wrist. Its silver edge caught the dining light, a small reminder that I had once been someone's piece. Later that week, she found me cleaning the pantry. "Mother Miles, what are you doing here?" "Just organizing," I said. "The labels were mixed up." She tilted her head. "We have a system. You don't need to fix everything. It feels invasive." Invasive. The word stung more than she intended. I wasn't invading anything. I was trying to belong. When she left, I whispered to myself, "Only help where you're wanted." I stacked the cans in perfect alignment, even though no one would notice. Mark started coming home later. His face looked tired. Sometimes he would find me in the kitchen and say, "Mom, maybe let Lila handle things. She's particular." "I just wanted to lighten her load," I'd reply. He nodded, eyes elsewhere. "It's just easier this way." Easier for him meant quieter for me. That night, while washing dishes, I spilled a bit of sugar on the counter. Lila entered right then, barefoot, wearing silk pajamas. "Me day het hone toilunda," she exclaimed, half laughing, half irritated. "You spilled sugar again. Itty. Gets sticky on the floor. I just had the cleaning lady come yesterday." "I'm sorry," I said, wiping it quickly. "It won't happen again." She shook her head, amused. "You say that every time." Every time. As if my existence was a series of small inconveniences. I heard Mrs. Ramirez's voice the next morning from outside the gate. "Olivia, is that you?" I opened the door. She stood there with her grocery bag, her hair tucked under a scarf. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were searching. "I haven't seen you in days. How are you adjusting?" "I'm fine," I lied. "They're busy, you know, young people." She glanced past me into the immaculate house. "Busy doesn't mean blind, dear." I hesitated, then laughed softly to change the subject. "Do you remember that rose bush you took care of?" "It's blooming again," she said, "even after the frost. Some roots hold on stronger than we expect." Her words lingered long after she left. Some roots hold on stronger. That afternoon, Lila hosted a video shoot in the living room. Lights, tripods, and props filled every corner. She wore a beige outfit and called it minimalist elegance. I tried to stay out of sight, reading on the porch. Through the glass, I heard her say, "Having an older family member around keeps me grounded." I looked down at my hands, spotted, veined, steady. I wondered if she even believed what she said. When the filming ended, she stepped outside, still glowing under her makeup lights. "Mother Miles, could you please avoid walking through the background next time? It ruins continuity." I nodded. "Of course." That night, Mark asked me why I looked tired. "You don't have to help with everything, Mom. Just relax." Relax. The word felt foreign. I wanted to ask him how to relax in a house where my every movement seemed wrong. Instead, I smiled and said, "I'm fine." The next morning, Lila criticized the way I folded towels. "We roll them, not fold them. It looks more aesthetic." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but instead I said, "I'll remember." Each comment was small, harmless when isolated, but together they built a quiet wall. Every correction, every sigh, every look that said "you are too much" or "not enough" chipped away at my sense of belonging. I began talking less. My world shrank to the rhythm of chores and whispers. The only voice that felt kind was Mrs. Ramirez's when she called every Sunday. She never asked too many questions. She just said, "You still have your garden hands, Olivia. You'll plan again one day." At night, I held the bracelet. Its surface had grown dull from constant touch, but the engraving still pressed against my skin like a pulse. I thought about Arthur's words, "You are the foundation of this family." If that were true, why did every step I took feel like walking on someone else's floor? I whispered into the dark, "Just try harder." But even as I said it, the words sounded empty. Effort means nothing when the ground beneath you is not yours. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, Lila's reflection appeared beside mine in the glass. "You know," she said, smoothing her hair, "people your age should just rest. You've done enough." Her voice was sugar-coated, but her eyes were dismissive. I met her gaze through the reflection and for the first time didn't look away. I didn't answer either. Silence, I realized, could be armor too. That evening, I stood on the porch. Across the street, Mrs. Ramirez waved, her groceries in hand. The warmth in her eyes reminded me of something I thought I'd lost. Quiet dignity. Inside, laughter rose from Lila's phone screen. Another video, another life curated for strangers. I looked at the glowing rectangle and thought, if only they saw what real silence looks like. I closed the door softly, the click echoing in the empty hallway. For the first time since I moved in, I stopped telling myself to try harder. I simply stood there, breathing, realizing that not all effort leads to acceptance. Sometimes it only feeds the illusion of belonging. And deep inside, a small voice began to whisper, not in despair, but in defiance. Maybe belonging isn't given. Maybe it's reclaimed. It started with the sound of the television, always the television. Whenever voices rose in the house, that machine became Mark's shield. Its laughter, its applause, its noise filled the space where his courage should have been. One evening, Lila shouted from the living room, "Who moved my candles again? I told you they're part of my set design." I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter. "I only dusted around them," I said softly. She sighed loudly. "Do you ever listen? Every time I clean, you rearrange everything. It's exhausting." Before I could respond, I heard the familiar click of the remote. The television roared to life. The sound of laughter filled the air, too bright, too fake. Mark sat on the couch, eyes glued to the screen, his thumb pressing the volume button higher and higher. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at her. He just disappeared into the noise. I stood there, motionless. The lights flickered from the changing scenes on the screen, painting my face in colors that didn't belong in this house. The television laughed again, but the sound felt cruel. I whispered under my breath. He used to turn it down when I spoke. Now it was louder than both of us. After Lila stormed upstairs, the house quieted again. The silence that followed was heavier than her anger. I gathered the cups from the table, my hands trembling slightly. One of them slipped, clinking against the counter. The sound made Mark flinch, but he didn't say a word. When I walked past him, he spoke without looking up. "Mom, maybe just stay out of it when she's upset. Stay out of it." As if the home I once helped him build was no longer mine to breathe in. That night, in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the faint hum of the TV from downstairs. The rhythm of it pulsed through the walls like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I pressed my hand against my chest and whispered, "Silence can hurt more than shouting." I thought of Arthur. He hated loud noises. He used to say, "Peace is not the absence of sound, Liv. It's the presence of understanding." But here, there was no peace, only static. The next morning, the same pattern repeated. Lila scolded me for hanging laundry wrong. Mark raised the TV. I spoke gently, trying to calm her, but she waved me off. "Just let me handle it, Mother Miles. You always complicate things." Again, the television swallowed her tone, replacing it with laughter. My words vanished beneath the noise. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Ramirez came by with a jar of homemade jam. She handed it to me over the gate, her eyes kind. "You look tired, Olivia," she said. "Is everything all right?" I smiled faintly. "Everything's fine, just the usual." She tilted her head. "You don't have to say fine when you're breaking inside. I used to do that too." Her words sank deep. I wanted to tell her everything, the noise, the looks, the silence, but I didn't. I just thanked her and went back inside. When I stepped into the living room, the television blared again. Lila was talking on the phone, pacing. "Yes, Mother Miles is still here. No, we can't move yet. Mark says she's fragile." Fragile. The word lingered like smoke in my throat. I sat in the armchair quietly. My bracelet caught the light again, a faint gleam of silver against my wrist. Arthur's words, "You are the foundation of this family," echoed in my head, but here I felt like a misplaced brick in someone else's wall. That night, another argument broke out. I heard my name, the clatter of plates. Lila's voice is sharp and cold. I told you, Mark, she needs boundaries. She's not your responsibility forever. And then the volume went up again. This time it was loud enough to shake the picture frames. I stood in the hallway, frozen. I wanted to speak, to remind my son that love is not an inconvenience, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, the only sound was the television. I turned toward my room, my steps slow. As I reached for the doorknob, I whispered the words that would later define everything. Silence is also an answer. The phrase left my mouth like a confession, soft yet final. Inside my room, I sat by the window. The moonlight reflected off the bracelet. I took it off, feeling its cool weight in my palm. For years, I wore it as a symbol of love. That night, it felt like a mirror showing me the truth I didn't want to face. I loosened my grip for a moment, and the bracelet slipped from my hand. It hit the floor with a sharp metallic ring. The sound was small but piercing, clean, deliberate, impossible to ignore. I bent down to pick it up, and for the first time, I noticed a tiny crack along the edge. I traced it with my finger, the silver cold against my skin. That crack felt like my reflection. I sat there for a long while, holding it in both hands. Downstairs, the television continued its endless chatter. Mark laughed at something on the screen. The sound rose through the walls, hollow and artificial. Each burst of laughter felt like a nail being driven into the distance between us. I wanted to believe he didn't mean to hurt me, that his silence was just confusion, not cruelty. But the truth was simpler and harder. Indifference is a choice, too. I stared at the bracelet again. Its crack glimmered faintly under the lamp. Something inside me hardened, the same way metal does under pressure. That night, before turning off the light, I whispered the words again, tasting them slowly. Silence is also an answer. It was not a statement of defeat, but of understanding. The moment I said it, I realized silence could wound, but it could also protect. Outside, the wind brushed against the window pane. Inside, the television hummed on, but I no longer listened. For the first time since Arthur's death, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of solitude and the strange power it carried. I picked up the bracelet, slipped it back onto my wrist, and whispered to the empty room, "Not all noise deserves a response." And with that, I turned off the lamp. The darkness felt less like loss and more like clarity. The night it happened, the air felt too still, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I was folding laundry in the guest room, careful not to mix their clothes with mine. The sound of the television drifted through the walls again, always the same laugh track, always the same escape. Then Lila's voice sliced through the air. "Mark, we can't keep doing this. She's ruining everything." I froze. The towel in my hands hung limp, half folded. Mark's voice was low, defensive. "She's my mother, Lila. What do you want me to do?" "What do I want?" Her laugh was sharp. "I want peace. I want my home back. Either she goes or I do." Silence. I could hear it spread, thick and slow, the kind of silence that builds a wall between people who once shared the same heartbeat. I placed the folded towel on the bed and waited. I don't know for what. Maybe for my son to speak up. Maybe for someone to choose kindness. Mark didn't. Instead, I heard the television click off. Footsteps. The floor creaked under their weight. My door opened without a knock. Mark stood there, shoulders hunched, his face gray under the hallway light. Behind him, Lila crossed her arms. She looked untouched, polished, like a verdict already written. "Mom," he began. His voice cracked a little. "Maybe it's better if you stay somewhere else for a while." "For a while," I repeated. The words tasted like dust. Lila added quickly, "We'll help you get settled. I just think we all need some space." Space. The word again. Cold, polite, final. I looked at my son. "Is that what you think too?" He didn't meet my eyes. "It's just too much tension. I can't take it anymore." I waited for him to say something else, to soften it, to apologize. But he didn't. He just stood there, twisting his wedding ring. There was no yelling, no tears, only the quiet understanding that something sacred had broken long before this moment. I nodded once. slowly. All right. I turned toward the dresser and opened the drawer. My hands were steady as I packed. 2 suitcases filled with clothes and memories that no longer fit. My jewelry box, a few framed photos, my sewing scissors. When I reached for the bracelet, it glinted in the light. I hesitated. Then I slipped it on, tight around my wrist, as if to remind myself that I still belonged to someone once. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of lemon polish and cold soup. The house looked the same, but it no longer felt alive. Lila was by the counter, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up when she said, "I'll transfer $200 for the week. It should cover a motel or something simple." $200. 40 years of motherhood reduced to an allowance. Mark avoided my gaze. He held the car keys like they were a lifeline. I picked up my suitcases and walked toward the door. My steps were slow, deliberate. Not because I was weak, but because I wanted to remember each one. The floorboards I had cleaned, the walls I had dusted, the air that had once carried my laughter. When I reached the doorway, I paused. The cool night air met my face. I turned to my son. "You don't have to do this," he said suddenly, as if the words could erase the scene unfolding in front of him. I smiled faintly. "You already did." He flinched, but didn't stop me. Outside, the world was quiet. The sky was heavy with clouds, promising rain. I placed my suitcases on the curb and stood there for a moment, unsure where to go. Mark came to the doorway, hands in his pockets. "Mom, I'll check on you in a few days." "Don't," I said softly. "You have enough to carry." He hesitated. For a moment, I thought he might step forward, but Lila's shadow appeared behind him, and that was enough to hold him in place. I watched him turn away. That was the moment my heart learned a new kind of silence, the kind that doesn't echo, doesn't scream, just settles deep and cold. I walked down the street, the wheels of my suitcase clicking against the pavement. A single streetlight flickered ahead, casting long, lonely shadows. I had no destination, only distance. At the corner, I looked back. Through the window, I could see them, 2 silhouettes framed by warm light. They looked like a family. I was the stranger, outside their picture. A drizzle began to fall, soft at first, then steadier. The silver bracelet caught the raindrops, tiny beads of water gathering on the surface. I raised my wrist to the light and whispered, "Arthur, are you watching this?" The rain answered with silence. I found an old bus shelter near the park. The bench was cold, metal slick with rain. I placed my suitcases beside me and sat. The city moved on. Cars, headlights, distant laughter, all of it untouched by my small disaster. I opened my wallet. $200. Bills folded neatly as if politeness could disguise humiliation. I tucked them back inside. My stomach tightened, but not from hunger, from disbelief. "Your own son," I whispered. "Your own blood." The rain grew heavier. A man across the shelter shifted, offering me a corner of his blanket. His face was lined, his eyes tired but kind. "You can sit here," he said. "Thank you," I murmured. "That's kind of you." He smiled faintly. "We all fall once or twice. Just some of us fall quieter." I nodded. I suppose I did. The bench creaked as I leaned back. My reflection shimmered faintly in the puddle at my feet, an old woman with rain in her hair and dignity clinging to her spine. I thought of Mark again, the boy who used to run to me when thunder scared him, the man who now hid behind television noise instead of standing beside me. A sob rose in my throat, but I swallowed it. Crying wouldn't change what was already true. I wrapped my coat tighter, the silver bracelet pressed against my wrist, firm and cold. "My son," I whispered to the night, brought me to the door as if I were an old piece of furniture, useful once, unwanted now. The rain answered again, steady and unbroken, and in that rhythm, beneath the ache, I felt the faint stir of something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the fragile seed of resolve. I had been cast out, yes, but I was still standing, and somewhere beyond this storm, I knew a different kind of home was waiting for me. The rain didn't stop that night. It fell in thin, relentless sheets, the kind that soaks through your coat before you even realize you're cold. I sat on the bench at the bus shelter, 2 suitcases beside me, a paper cup of lukewarm coffee cooling in my hands. The city lights blurred into long streaks of gold and gray through the downpour. I pulled my coat tighter. My breath came out in small clouds. Around me, the world carried on. Cars rushed past. People hurried under umbrellas, their faces turned away from the weather and from anyone like me. It was strange sitting there, invisible in the same world where I once hosted dinners, folded laundry, and laughed over soup. At some point, a bus stopped. The driver looked at me through the open door. "You getting in, ma'am?" I shook my head. "Not tonight." He nodded once and closed the doors. The engine roared, the lights faded, and I was left with the whisper of rain. Time blurred. My legs stiffened, my fingers numbed. The bracelet on my wrist felt like ice. I rubbed it gently, remembering Arthur's hands, warm, calloused, steady. He used to say winter never lasts forever. I wondered what he'd say now. Across the shelter sat a man I hadn't noticed before. His clothes were worn, his hair matted under a hood. He looked at me quietly, no judgment in his eyes, only recognition. After a while, he reached into a torn backpack and pulled out a folded blanket. He walked over and held it out. "Take it," he said. His voice was rough but kind. "It's dry enough." "I can't," I whispered. "You need it more." He shook his head. "Got another one." I hesitated, then accepted it. The fabric was coarse, smelled faintly of smoke and rain. I wrapped it around my shoulders. The warmth seeped in slowly, a mercy I hadn't expected. "Thank you," I said. He sat back down, stretching his legs. "Cold nights don't care who you used to be," he said softly. "They treat everyone the same." His words sank into me deeper than the cold. For a long time, we didn't speak again. The rain did all the talking. At some point, I whispered, "I used to have a home." He looked at me, eyes tired but understanding. "We all did." A gust of wind swept through, rattling the shelter. One of my suitcases toppled over, spilling a few folded clothes. I bent down to pick them up. My hands shook from the chill. He helped me, his movements slow but sure. When everything was back in place, I sat again. My reflection in the glass pane looked foreign. An old woman with silver hair plastered to her face, eyes red from exhaustion. Yet beneath that image, I caught a flicker of something unbroken. The man lit a small cigarette, shielding it from the rain. "You got anyone you can call?" he asked. "No one who would answer," I said. He nodded. "Then you rest here. It's dry enough for the night." I leaned back, clutching the blanket closer. The sound of rain on the roof above became a lullaby of sorts. Steady, unfeeling, eternal. At some point, my thoughts drifted back to Mark. I saw his face when he told me to leave. The uncertainty, the guilt, the weakness. I told myself he was trapped, that maybe one day he'd see what he'd done. But a quieter voice inside whispered, he already saw and chose silence anyway. Tears burned my eyes, but I let them fall freely this time. There was no one left to hide them from. The man across the shelter hummed a tune under his breath. Something low and old, maybe a hymn. I closed my eyes and listened. His voice carried warmth where the world had turned cold. Hours passed. The city quieted. Somewhere a church bell rang at midnight. I pulled the blanket tighter and whispered into the night, "Thank you, stranger, for giving me what my own blood could not." The words came out shaky but honest. He didn't answer, only nodded slightly, as if he'd heard them 1,000 times before from other lost souls. When dawn approached, the rain turned to drizzle. The first light of morning crept across the wet pavement. I opened my eyes to see the man already awake, sipping from a tin cup. He offered it to me. Coffee, still warm. I took a sip. It was bitter, thin, but it tasted like kindness. "Where will you go?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I said. "Maybe somewhere quieter." He smiled faintly. "Quiet can be good. Sometimes it's the only thing left that doesn't lie." We sat in silence for a while longer, two strangers bound by circumstance, not pity. When I stood to leave, I folded the blanket carefully and tried to give it back. He pushed it toward me. "Keep it. You'll need it again." I hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you," I said once more. As I walked away, my shoes splashing through shallow puddles, The bracelet caught the morning light. It no longer felt like a relic of the past. It felt like proof that I had survived the night. The air smelled of wet earth and diesel. My hair clung to my forehead, my steps slow but steady. Each movement felt deliberate, like claiming space in a world that had tried to erase me. When I reached the corner, I turned back. The man was still sitting there, wrapped in his other blanket, head bowed in quiet prayer or rest. For the first time in a long while, I smiled. Small, fragile, real. The city woke around me. Horns, footsteps, life beginning again. I stood there, invisible but not broken. The cold still bit at my skin, but somewhere deep inside, a different warmth began to stir. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was something close. And as I started walking again, I whispered to myself, maybe the world hasn't forgotten me completely. Maybe kindness just changed its address. When the rain finally stopped, I found myself walking without direction. My shoes squelched with each step, my coat heavy with water. The blanket the stranger had given me was still wrapped around my shoulders, its weight a reminder that kindness could appear in unexpected places. The sun tried to break through the clouds, thin and pale. I reached a small diner at the edge of town, a place with flickering neon lights and the smell of burnt coffee. The waitress, a young woman with tired eyes, handed me a paper napkin and pointed to a booth in the corner. I ordered nothing more than hot tea. As I sat there, thawing slowly, I remembered the suitcases beside me. They were all I had left of a life once full. I placed them on the seat and opened the first one, more from habit than purpose. Inside were clothes, neatly folded, though now damp from the night. Beneath them, wrapped in a wool sweater, lay one of Arthur's old shirts. The fabric was worn thin at the elbows, still smelling faintly of cedar. I pressed it to my cheek. For a moment, I closed my eyes and imagined his arms around me, the safe weight of his presence. When I unfolded the shirt, something slipped out from the pocket, a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly with age. My breath caught. On the front, in Arthur's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For Olivia, when you need it most." I froze. The edges trembled between my fingers. My heartbeat quickened, echoing in my chest like the ticking of a clock. I placed the envelope on the table and just stared at it. The paper looked fragile, but it carried a gravity that made my hands shake. I took a sip of tea, hoping to steady them, but the cup rattled slightly as I set it down. I ran my thumb over his handwriting again. Arthur had never been one for secrets. What could he have possibly left that I hadn't already known? Slowly, carefully, I broke the seal. Inside was a letter, neatly folded, his writing still firm and elegant. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. "My dearest Liv, if you are reading this, it means I'm no longer there to tell you these things myself. I know you. You'd rather endure than ask for help. You'd rather shrink than be a burden. But you were never a burden. You were the heart of every wall I built, the warmth of every room. I worried what would happen when I was gone. I saw how much you gave, how you carried more than anyone ever noticed. So I made sure that if the world turned unkind, you would never be without a foundation of your own. Years ago, I opened an investment account in your name. The returns were better than I expected. I also purchased a property, not for profit, but for protection. It's in your name, fully paid. If things ever fall apart, this will stand for you. The address is 241 Oak Ridge Avenue. I never told Mark. I didn't want him to depend on something he hadn't earned. Liv, promise me you'll never forget this. You were never the dependent one. You were the strength. You were the foundation. Love always, Arthur. The words blurred before my eyes. I pressed the paper to my chest, trying to breathe. Oak Ridge Avenue. The name felt familiar. I whispered it aloud, the syllables heavy with recognition. Oak Ridge Avenue. My hands began to shake as realization spread through me like wildfire. That was the very street where Mark and Lila lived. Their house, their home, was on Oak Ridge Avenue. I unfolded the letter again to check, as if my eyes might have tricked me. But there it was, clear and undeniable. 241 Oak Ridge Avenue. I sat in stunned silence. The sounds of the diner faded, The clinking of dishes, the low hum of conversation, all distant now. My mind was spinning, trying to piece together what this meant. Arthur hadn't just left me something, he had left me ownership. All this time, I had been treated as an intruder in a home that was mine. They had pushed me out of a house I legally owned. My breath hitched. I felt dizzy. I folded the letter carefully, afraid it might crumble in my hands. The bracelet on my wrist pressed against my skin, the silver cool and steady. I thought of Arthur's last words in the letter. You were never the dependent one. For years, I had believed my worth was tied to service, to giving, forgiving, enduring. But this letter was proof of something different, proof that I had built as much as I had given. I reached into the envelope again and found a second sheet. Numbers, bank details, and a note from Arthur's lawyer dated years ago. It confirmed everything. The property, the investment, all under my name. Tears welled again, but this time not from sorrow. It was disbelief, relief, and something else. Vindication. I thought of Mark and Lila, of the way they spoke to me, looked through me, dismissed me. Every insult, every command, every silence. And now, the walls they lived within, those walls were mine. I let out a small, shaking laugh. Not cruel, just incredulous. I imagined Arthur somewhere above, smiling that quiet, knowing smile. He'd always seen farther than I did, always trusted me to stand when the world expected me to kneel. I whispered to the letter, "You always knew, didn't you?" The waitress came by to refill my tea. She noticed the tears on my cheeks but said nothing, only placed a napkin beside the cup. Her kindness, like the stranger's blanket, reminded me that compassion often came from those with the least to spare. I looked out the window. The clouds were breaking, streaks of sunlight spilling through. The pavement shimmered, slick but glowing. For the first time in a long while, the world didn't look entirely cruel. I folded the letter back into its envelope and placed it in my purse, close to my heart. My hand still trembled as I zipped it shut. Arthur's words echoed inside me. "You can stand on your own." I whispered them aloud. "I can." The tremor in my fingers steadied. I reached for my cup of tea and took a slow sip. The warmth spread through me, not from the tea itself, but from the sudden clarity of knowing I still had power, even after everything. Outside, a bus passed, splashing through puddles. I caught my reflection in the window. The woman looking back wasn't the same one who had been thrown out the night before. Her eyes were tired, yes, but no longer defeated. I touched the bracelet again, tracing the small crack that now felt less like damage and more like character. "Arthur," I whispered, "you believed I could stand alone. Maybe now it's time to prove you right." And with that, I picked up my suitcases, stood tall, and stepped into the light spilling across the wet street, each step heavier with purpose, lighter with freedom. I left the diner with Arthur's letter pressed against my heart, the envelope warm from my body heat. The morning air smelled of rain and asphalt, and every step I took felt both heavier and freer. I didn't know what I was walking toward, but for the first time in months, it wasn't away from something. It was towards something mine. Arthur had mentioned an attorney in his note, a man named Ethan Cole. His card was tucked behind the letter, yellowed and slightly bent. The address was downtown, not far from where the buses ended their route. I clutched it in my palm and walked. The building stood tall and glassy, reflecting the sky. I hesitated before stepping inside. My shoes were still damp, my hair frizzed from the rain, and I looked every bit like a woman who'd slept in a bus shelter. But dignity, I reminded myself, isn't measured by appearance. It's measured by standing up when no one expects you to. The receptionist, a young woman with neat hair and kind eyes, looked up. "Do you have an appointment?" "I'm not sure," I said softly, "but I was told to find Mr. Ethan Cole. My name is Olivia Miles." Her expression changed. She typed something into her computer, then looked back at me with a small smile. "Yes, Mrs. Miles, Mr. Cole will see you right away." I followed her down a hallway lined with muted photographs, buildings, courthouses, trees in bloom. At the end of the hall, she opened a door. Inside, a man in his 40s looked up from behind a desk. His hair was dark, his eyes steady, his posture calm but alert. "Mrs. Miles," he said, standing to shake my hand. "It's good to finally meet you. Arthur spoke of you often." I blinked. "You knew my husband?" He nodded. "We worked together years ago. He was meticulous about protecting what mattered most. When he passed, he left me instructions to hold certain documents until you came." He gestured for me to sit. I lowered myself into the chair, still unsure whether to breathe or cry. He pulled open a file drawer and retrieved a folder with my name typed neatly on the tab. Miles, Olivia. He laid it in front of me. Inside were papers, legal seals, and account statements with numbers that didn't look real. Ethan spoke evenly, like a man accustomed to explaining storms. "Your husband left you full ownership of 241 Oak Ridge Avenue, along with 2 investment accounts. Everything is in your name. No one can dispute it." My voice came out faint. "But my son and his wife live there. They believe it's theirs." "They can believe what they like," he said gently. "The deeds say otherwise." I exhaled slowly, the truth both comforting and crushing. "I don't want to ruin them," I said. "I just want peace." He studied me for a moment. "This isn't revenge, Mrs. Miles. It's restoration. What's yours should return to you, and you don't have to lift a hand in anger to make that happen." He opened a smaller folder, revealing legal forms and a typed plan. "Here's what I suggest. We set up a limited liability company, an LLC, under a neutral name. It'll protect your privacy and allow you to manage the property anonymously. We can transfer ownership from your personal name to the LLC without alerting them right away. That way, you maintain full control without confrontation." I hesitated. "Wouldn't that make me deceitful?" He smiled slightly. "No, Mrs. Miles. It makes you careful. The law protects those who act with foresight, not those who wait to be trampled." His calm certainty steadied me. For years, I had handled family finances, grocery budgets, small acts of survival. But this was different. This was reclaiming power through precision, not noise. He slid a pen toward me. "You'll need to sign a few forms. We'll open a bank account under the new entity. That account will receive rent payments from all current tenants at 241 Oak Ridge Avenue." I paused. "Tenants?" "Yes," he said. "According to the records, the house is part of a subdivided property with 2 rental units. You've been earning income for years, you just didn't know it. The payments were redirected to a holding fund per your husband's instructions, waiting for you to claim them." I felt lightheaded. "Arthur thought of everything." Ethan nodded. "He trusted your strength, even if you forgot it." He reviewed the paperwork with me line by line. His patience reminded me of Arthur explaining blueprints at the dinner table, always certain that I could understand if given time. When we finished, Ethan stood, extended his hand again, and said quietly, "Mrs. Miles, welcome back to your own life." The words nearly broke me. For the next several hours, we set everything in motion. A new bank account, a new LLC, a new beginning. The name I chose was Silver Foundation Holdings. I smiled faintly when Ethan asked about it. "It's from something my husband wrote," I said. "He said I was the foundation of our family. Silver for my bracelet, foundation for his faith." He nodded, typing the name onto the final form. "It suits you." By the time we were done, the afternoon light had softened into gold. Ethan gathered the documents into a folder and handed them to me. "Everything is filed. Within 72 hours, you'll officially be the registered owner of Silver Foundation Holdings, sole controller of the Oak Ridge property, and manager of all financial assets tied to it." I stared at the folder, its weight both literal and symbolic. "What happens next?" He smiled faintly. "Next, we'll revise the lease agreements, quietly. The tenants, including your son, will receive updated terms reflecting market rates. It's not punishment, Mrs. Miles. It's fair." I nodded slowly. "I don't want to hurt them." "I know," he said. "You just want the truth to stand." I took a deep breath. "Then let it stand." He offered me a small card with his number handwritten at the bottom. "Call me anytime, even if it's just to talk. You've spent too long carrying things alone." I looked at him then, not as a lawyer, but as another kind of stranger offering warmth on a cold night. "Thank you," said quietly. "You treat me like I matter." He smiled. "You do. You always did. The law just forgot to remind you." As I stepped outside, the city looked different. The same buildings, the same streets, but the weight on my shoulders had shifted. Power no longer felt like something cruel or loud. It was quiet, steady, like the hum of truth returning to its rightful place. I walked past the bus stop where I had slept 2 nights before. The same man was there, still wrapped in his blanket. I reached into my purse and placed a bill in his hand, and he looked up, startled. "Keep it," I said. "It's dry enough now." He smiled faintly, the same way Ethan had. "Good luck, ma'am." "Thank you," I whispered. When I reached the corner, I paused. The sun was low, turning the wet pavement into gold. I touched the bracelet again and felt its cool weight settle against my skin. Arthur's words echoed in my mind, clear and steady as Ethan's voice. "You were never the dependent one. You were the foundation." And this time, I believed it. Power, I learned, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, patient and steady, waiting for the right moment to speak. 3 days after meeting Ethan, I stood across the street from 241 Oak Ridge Avenue, the house I once called home. The same house where I'd been told to leave with nothing but 2 suitcases. The morning sun glinted off the windows, too bright for such a cold structure. I watched from a distance, hidden behind the shade of an old oak tree. Mark's car was in the driveway. Lila's voice drifted faintly through an open window, sharp and impatient as ever. A delivery truck pulled up, bringing new furniture. I almost smiled. They were still decorating a home they didn't truly own. Ethan had called earlier that morning. His voice was calm, composed. "The documents have gone through," he said. "Silver Foundation Holdings is officially registered, and the property transfer is complete. You are now, in every legal sense, the landlord." The words settled over me like sunlight breaking through fog. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "What happens next?" "I've prepared updated lease agreements for all tenants," he said. "They reflect the current market rates and remove any special family exceptions. I'll have them delivered this afternoon." I hesitated. "So, they'll know?" "Eventually," he replied. "But not that it's you. The LLC will handle all communication. You remain anonymous." Silence filled the line. He must have sensed my uncertainty because his tone softened. "This isn't revenge, Mrs. Miles. It's an order. You're restoring balance, not breaking it." I looked up at the house again. The curtains fluttered in the breeze, the same lace ones I had once washed and ironed with care. "They won't understand," I said quietly. "Perhaps not now," Ethan replied, "but understanding isn't required for justice." When I hung up, I stayed there watching as the delivery men carried boxes inside. For the first time, I felt no anger, no bitterness, just clarity. There's a certain peace in reclaiming what's yours without announcing it. Later that afternoon, Ethan sent me a message confirming that the letters had been delivered. Each envelope bore the logo of Silver Foundation Holdings, stamped neatly in blue. Inside was a simple statement: new terms, new payment schedule, 30 days to comply. I didn't sign them as Olivia Miles. I signed them as Manager, Silver Foundation Holdings, LLC. It felt strange and empowering all at once. I made tea at the small motel room I had rented for the week. The kettle hissed softly as I poured the water. The silver bracelet caught the light again, glimmering like quiet defiance. I held my cup between both hands and whispered, "I don't need to shout to be heard." That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The next morning, Ethan called again. "They've received the notices," he said. "Expect noise, but don't respond." Noise. The irony wasn't lost on me. My son had hidden behind television noise for years. Now he'd be forced to listen to silence. I followed his instructions. I said nothing. I didn't answer the phone when the unknown number rang, didn't reply to the emails that came through the LLC inbox asking for clarification. Every message was polite but persistent. Then came the one from Lila. We've just received new lease terms from some company called Silver Foundation Holdings. There must be a mistake. We've lived here for years under family terms. Please contact the owner immediately. I read it 3 times, my hand hovering over the keyboard. Then I closed the laptop. Some truths didn't require replies. Days passed. I returned to small routines, morning walks, quiet breakfasts, writing letters to Arthur that I never sent. The ache of loss was still there, but it no longer ruled me. It sat quietly beside my strength, no longer louder than it. Ethan updated me regularly. They've reached out twice through a representative, he said one evening. I responded with standard legal language. They have 30 days to accept or vacate. No one is being treated unfairly. I thanked him. It's strange, I admitted. For years, I begged to be heard. Now that I finally am, I find I have nothing left to say. He was silent for a moment before answering. That's the difference between noise and power, Mrs. Miles. Power doesn't need witnesses. I ended the call sitting in the quiet of my small room. The walls were bare, but they were mine. I thought of Arthur's letter again. You can stand on your own. He had been right. 2 weeks later, I walked past the house again. It looked the same from the outside, but something invisible had shifted. The lawn hadn't been trimmed. The flower beds were dull. Lila's luxury car was missing. Perhaps she had gone to meet a lawyer, or maybe to vent her outrage to her followers online. I paused at the gate, unseen, unheard. My eyes lifted to the window of what used to be my room. The curtains were open, the same ones she had once criticized me for choosing. For a brief moment, I saw Mark standing there. He looked tired, his hair unkempt, his shoulders slumped. He held his phone in one hand, staring at something. Perhaps the lease notice, perhaps a memory. I didn't wave. I didn't turn away either. I just stood there, the distance between us filled with all the words we'd never said. He looked out the window, but his gaze passed right through me, as if he couldn't see what was right in front of him. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he didn't know how to look anymore. When he stepped back, I whispered to the wind, "I'm not angry, Mark. I'm awake." The silver bracelet slipped slightly on my wrist. I adjusted it, the motion gentle, almost ceremonial. The small crack in the metal glinted under the afternoon sun, a reminder of both wound and resilience. Later, Ethan called again. "They've signed the new terms," he said simply. I closed my eyes, relief mingling with something deeper, a quiet pride. "So it's done," I said. "It's done," he confirmed. "You've reclaimed what's yours, Olivia. No revenge, no spectacle, just balance restored." After the call, I walked down to the lakeside. The water shimmered in the fading light. A few ducks drifted lazily across the surface, unbothered by the ripples. I sat on a bench and let the wind move through my hair. It occurred to me that justice doesn't always arrive in the form of confrontation. Sometimes it comes quietly, wearing the clothes of dignity. I whispered again, not to anyone in particular, but to the space around me. I don't need to scream to be heard. My silence is enough. The lake mirrored the sky, silver and calm. I dipped my fingers into the water, watching the rings expand outward. Each ripple reached farther than the last, yet made no sound at all. That was the kind of power I wanted. Steady, unannounced, undeniable. I smiled, a small, private thing, and whispered to the memory of Arthur, "You were right, love. I can stand alone." And in that stillness, for the first time, I truly believed it. The silence didn't break all at once. It cracked slowly, the way ice gives beneath weight. Weeks passed after the new lease terms took effect. I heard nothing from them directly, but news has its own way of traveling, especially when people begin to stumble. Ethan called one afternoon. His tone was careful, almost measured. "You might hear about some financial disruptions connected to the Oak Ridge property," he said. "Just remember, this isn't about punishment. It's a consequence." "What kind of disruptions?" I asked. He paused. Their payment was declined twice. The bank has flagged them. It seems they've overextended themselves. I said nothing. The tea in my cup had gone cold. After we hung up, I walked to the window of my small apartment. The world outside looked ordinary. Children walking home from school, a man selling newspapers at the corner. Yet I felt something shifting quietly beneath that ordinariness, like justice exhaling after holding its breath too long. A few days later, Mrs. Ramirez stopped by. She had a folded newspaper in her hands. "You might want to see this," she said, placing it on my kitchen table. There it was, printed in glossy color. Lila Grant's sponsorship with Maison Luria officially terminated due to contractual inconsistencies. The photo beneath showed Lila smiling at some gala months earlier, all diamonds and pretense. I could almost hear her laughter, the same brittle, hollow sound that used to fill my kitchen. "She built her brand on perfection," Mrs. Ramirez said quietly. "I suppose perfection doesn't survive unpaid rent." I smiled faintly. No, it doesn't. That evening, curiosity pulled me to her social media page. The glamorous videos were gone, replaced by apologies wrapped in vague language about financial setbacks and temporary challenges. Comments poured in, half sympathetic, half cruel. The internet can smell desperation. I closed the app. I felt no joy, only a strange stillness, like watching a storm you didn't summon, but always knew would come. 2 days later, Ethan sent me an update. "They've officially defaulted on the lease payment," he said. "Under standard procedure, late fees apply and eviction notices may be filed within 30 days. "Will you tell them?" I asked. "No," he replied. "The LLC will handle it. They'll get the message through official mail. You remain invisible." Invisible. It was the same word that once described my place in their home, but now it meant power. It meant safety. That evening, my phone rang. Unknown number. I stared at the screen. Something in my chest tighten. I knew before answering who it was. I didn't pick up. The call ended. A minute later, another came. This time, I let it ring until the sound faded. My phone buzzed again. A voicemail. I pressed play, the voice trembling through static. "Mom, it's me. Please call me back." The word mom landed heavy in the room. It had been months since I'd heard it spoken with sincerity. Another message followed, this time longer. "Things are complicated, Mom. We've had some financial issues. Lila lost some contracts, and the bank, well, they froze our account for review. We might need help sorting this out. Could you call me when you can? Please?" The silence afterward was louder than his voice. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. Every instinct of motherhood urged me to call back, to rescue, to soothe. But then, in that stillness, another voice rose, the one I had learned to trust. Silence is also an answer. I turned off the phone. That night, I dreamt of the house again, but this time it wasn't mine, and it wasn't theirs. It was just a building, walls, windows, a roof. The kind of place that stands or falls by how it's kept, not who claims it. Morning came gray and quiet. I made tea and read the newspaper again, not for gossip, but for perspective. I realized that when people lose what they take for granted, they often call it injustice. But sometimes it's simply the return of balance. Ethan visited later that week to deliver some paperwork in person. He noticed the unread messages on my phone and said softly, "You haven't called him back." "No," I said. "Do you plan to?" I looked at him. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." He nodded. Sometimes silence teaches louder than any lecture. I smiled faintly. It's the only language he taught me to understand. He stayed for tea. We didn't talk about legalities that day. We talked about simple things, the weather, the changing leaves, the sound of quiet neighborhoods at dusk. When he left, he said, "You carry yourself differently now." "I suppose losing everything helps you see what's worth keeping," I replied. Later that evening, the phone buzzed again. Another voicemail from Mark. His tone was different now, strained, smaller. "Mom, I don't know what's happening. The rent increased out of nowhere. The owner won't negotiate. Lila's furious. I don't understand. Please, I need to talk to you." I listened to the entire message without flinching. Then softly, I whispered to the empty room, "Understanding isn't owed, my son. It's earned." I deleted the message. A week passed. Through Ethan, I learned that Mark's loan application had been denied. The bank no longer recognized his collateral. Without the house's equity, his credit collapsed. Lila, already spiraling from public embarrassment, moved out temporarily to focus on her brand. The perfect life they had curated online was unraveling, thread by thread, and I hadn't lifted a single finger. I sat by the window, watching rain slide down the glass. The city lights shimmered beyond, blurred and distant. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel powerless or vengeful. I felt balanced. Ethan called again that night. "Would you like me to forward their payment reminders directly to them?" "Yes," I said. "No exceptions. They live by contracts, not compassion." He paused. "Understood." When the call ended, I looked at my phone one last time. Another missed call from Mark. I didn't even listen to the voicemail this time. I turned the phone face down on the table. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was whole. I thought of Arthur then, of his steady faith in me. He had seen this day long before I could imagine it, the day I would stop, asking to be seen, and instead choose to stand. The rain softened outside. I walked to the window, touching the cool glass. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled faintly, echoing the shift of something larger than any one of us. I whispered, almost to myself, "Silence is also an answer." And for the first time, it didn't sound like a loss. It sounded like peace. Ethan called on a gray Tuesday morning. His tone was steady, but I could sense something behind it. "Mrs. Miles," he said, "your son has requested a meeting with the property's managing representative. He wants to appeal the new lease terms." I took a slow breath. "Does he know who owns the building?" "No," Ethan replied. "He believes it's a corporate entity. He wants to discuss payment extensions and maybe, his words, appeal to reason. I can meet him myself if you prefer." I looked out the window. The morning light spilled across the table, catching the faint gleam of my silver bracelet. For a long moment, I didn't answer. Finally, I said quietly, "No, Ethan. I'll meet him." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said. "It's time." 2 days later, I arrived at Ethan's office early. The conference room was quiet, the air faintly scented with coffee and paper. I sat behind the desk where Ethan usually worked, my hands resting gently on the polished surface. The chair felt large, deliberate, like a seat one must grow into. Ethan entered briefly to check on me. "He'll be here soon," he said. "I'll stay close if you need me." I nodded. "Thank you, but I think silence will do the talking today." He smiled faintly. "It usually does." When he left, I straightened my posture and folded my hands. The silver bracelet slid down my wrist, catching the light. I let it rest there, visible, almost intentional. A few minutes later, the door opened. Mark stepped inside. He looked different. Drawn, thinner, his usual confidence cracked around the edges. The tailored suits and polished shoes were still there, but the man wearing them looked smaller inside them. He didn't notice me at first. His eyes darted around the room, searching for someone else. "I'm here to see Mr. Cole," he said, his voice polite but strained. I let a few seconds pass before speaking. "He isn't available this morning." He froze at the sound of my voice. His head turned slowly. When his eyes met mine, the color drained from his face. "Mom," he whispered, "what are you doing here?" I met his gaze evenly. "Sitting where I belong." He blinked, confusion giving way to disbelief. Wait, are you the manager? The owner?" I didn't answer immediately. I wanted him to feel the space between the words. Then, softly, I said, "You're standing in my building, Mark." His lips parted. He stared at me as if the world had tilted. "That's not possible. The house, Lila said, was under her father's name." I shook my head gently. "Your father bought it. For me. Years ago. You just never asked whose name was on the deed." He took a step forward, his voice trembling. "You're saying, all this time, the house was yours?" "Yes," I said quietly. "It always was." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. I could see his mind racing, every memory, every assumption collapsing in on itself. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at the bracelet on my wrist, turning it slowly between my fingers. "You wouldn't have listened." He exhaled sharply, a sound caught between disbelief and shame. "Lila's been furious for weeks. We thought some faceless company was doing this to us. I tried to fix it. I wanted to protect our family." "Our family?" I repeated softly. "You chose which part of it mattered to you." He flinched, then dropped his gaze. "Mom, please. I made mistakes. I was trying to keep peace." "Peace doesn't come from silence," I said, my voice calm but steady. "You taught me that, every time you turn up the television." His head lifted sharply. Our eyes met. For the first time, I saw the boy he once was, the one who used to hold my hand in crowded rooms, the one who believed I could fix everything. He took another step forward. "Mom, please, say something." I breathed in slowly, the air heavy with everything unsaid. Then I said the words that had waited so long to be spoken. "You chose silence, Mark. Now it's my turn." The room stilled. He stared at me as if trying to understand a language he'd never learned. "You're really not going to help?" he whispered. "I already did," I said. "I built you a home. I gave you love. I taught you the meaning of respect by living it, but you only heard what you wanted." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "Lila's gone," he said quietly. "She left last week. Said she couldn't live like this. I lost my job, Mom. I don't know what to do." I stayed silent. He looked at me, desperate. "You don't have to punish me like this." "I'm not punishing you," I said gently. "I'm giving you what you gave me." He frowned, confusion flickering. "What do you mean?" "Space," I said simply. "And silence." He looked at me for a long time. The reality of it, the finality, seeped into him slowly. His shoulders sagged. His hands fell to his sides. For once, there was no noise left to fill the air between us. After a moment, I reached for the folder on the desk and slid it toward him. "These are the revised lease terms. You can stay if you meet them. If not, you'll need to find somewhere else." He didn't touch the folder. He just stared at it. "You really mean this?" "I do." He swallowed hard. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Forgiveness isn't mine to give," I said. "It's something you earn from yourself." His eyes filled with tears, but no words followed. For the first time, he understood what silence could mean. Not absence, but consequence. I stood slowly. The chair creaked softly against the floor. "You should go, Mark." He nodded weakly. "Will I see you again?" I paused at the doorway. "That depends on which version of you comes next." He didn't answer. He just stood there, the folder still untouched, his reflection faint in the glass of the office window. I watched him for a heartbeat longer, then turned away. As I walked down the hall, the bracelet brushed softly against my wrist. Cool and constant, I remembered Arthur's words again. "You are the foundation." Outside, the wind carried the faint hum of the city. I breathed it in deeply. Behind me, the door remained closed. Inside that room, silence did its quiet work, the kind that doesn't break people, but teaches them what sound never could. I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer. Silence is also an answer. And this time, it wasn't armor. It was freedom. The days that followed our meeting unfolded in quiet stillness, the kind that lingers after a storm. Ethan said Mark hadn't signed the lease renewal. I wasn't surprised. Pride resists paper even when it's drowning. I didn't see him again until the end of the month. It was late afternoon when the call came. Ethan's voice was calm, steady. "Mrs. Miles, your son requested to meet once more. He wants to discuss the termination. I hesitated, staring out the window of my small apartment. The light outside was soft, golden, forgiving. I said, "All right, but this time no explanations, just closure." When I arrived at the office, Ethan met me at the door. "I'll leave you both to it," he said quietly. "He seems different today." Inside, Mark was already seated. The room looked the same as before, but the air felt heavier. He stood when I entered, his expression uncertain. He looked older, the lines on his face deeper, not from time, but from reckoning. "Mom," he began softly. "Sit down, Mark," I said. My voice was calm, even. "Let's finish what we started." He sat. Between us on the desk lay 2 sets of papers, the termination documents and the bracelet on my wrist catching the afternoon sun. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The silence was no longer a weapon, nor a wall. It was simply the truth. Plain, unavoidable. Finally, he said, "I've been thinking about everything, about what I did and didn't do." I looked at him steadily. "Thinking is a start." He exhaled. "Lila left for good. She said I wasn't enough anymore. She blames me for everything. Maybe she's right." I didn't answer. He waited, as if hoping I would comfort him the way I once did. But motherhood, I had learned, doesn't mean endless rescue. His voice cracked. "I kept hearing your words. You chose silence. I thought I was keeping peace, but I was just hiding." I nodded slightly. Peace without respect is only quiet cruelty. He swallowed hard. "I should have stood up for you. I should have seen what she was doing." "You saw," I said gently. "You just didn't want to look." He lowered his eyes. The papers on the desk rustled in the faint breeze from the air vent. Then, after a long silence, I said what I had carried for months. The truth unspoken until now. "I didn't leave your home, Mark. You left me first." His head lifted, eyes wide, the meaning hitting him like a slow, silent tide. I continued, my voice steady. "Long before you told me to pack, you left me behind every time you turned up the volume instead of defending me. Every time you choose comfort over courage. I was still standing there, but you were already gone." Tears welled in his eyes, blurring the reflection of the desk light. "I know," he whispered. "I can't change that." "No," I said quietly, "but you can face it. That's where redemption begins." He nodded slowly, his shoulders shaking. "What happens now?" I reached for the pen beside the documents. "Now we finish the story." I signed my name, Olivia Miles, Managing Director, Silver Foundation Holdings. The ink spread clean and final across the page. It wasn't anger that guided my hand, it was acceptance. When I was done, I slid the papers across the desk. "Your lease is officially terminated. The property will be reassigned. You'll receive notice from the agency about vacating." He stared at the documents, not moving. His lips parted slightly, but no words came. I stood, adjusting the sleeve of my jacket. "You'll find your way, Mark. Maybe this time without noise." He looked up then, his voice barely audible. "Can you ever forgive me?" I paused. The question hung in the air, trembling like a note waiting to resolve. Finally, I said softly, "Forgiveness isn't a ticket back into my life. It's what I give so I can keep living mine." He flinched, then nodded, his chin quivering. "I don't hate you," I continued, "but I don't owe you my peace anymore." He whispered, "I understand." I reached for my purse, the weight of the bracelet cold against my wrist. "When you understand fully, you won't need my forgiveness. You'll start forgiving yourself." He wiped his face with the back of his hand, the sound small, human. "I don't know how." "You will," I said, "when the noise fades." He leaned back in the chair, defeated but still breathing. I walked to the door. My reflection glimmered faintly in the glass, a woman who had bent but not broken. Just before I stepped out, I turned back to him. "Do you remember what your father used to say about foundations?" He looked up slowly. "That a house can fall and still be rebuilt if the foundation stands." I nodded. I stood. Mark, even when you forgot I was holding you. He closed his eyes, tears spilling quietly down his cheeks. I opened the door. Ethan was standing outside, waiting. He met my eyes and didn't speak, only nodded in quiet respect. As I walked down the hallway, the air felt lighter, cleaner. The burden that had lived in my chest for years had finally exhaled. Outside, the sun was sinking low, turning the glass buildings amber. I stopped for a moment, letting the warmth touch my face. For so long, I had mistaken endurance for love. But love, I realized now, also meant knowing when to let go. I whispered into the fading light, "He'll find his peace someday." And I already found mine. The silver bracelet gleamed faintly, no longer a reminder of sorrow, but of survival. I traced the small crack along its edge, smiling. It wasn't broken. It was proof that I had lived through pressure and come out whole. And as the last light of day touched the city, I walked away, not from my son, but from the ache of needing to be understood. Sometimes, letting go isn't abandonment, it's release. The lake house wasn't large or grand, but the first time I saw it, something in me recognized the silence. It was the kind of silence that didn't hurt. It breathed. The air smelled of pine and open water. The boards creaked when I stepped inside, soft and familiar, like a house remembering how to be lived in. I bought it with my own name on the deed, not an LLC, not a trust, not a man's signature beside mine, just Olivia Miles. The realtor looked at me curiously when I signed the papers. "You're sure you don't want to wait for a family member to co-sign?" I smiled. "I've waited long enough. This one's mine." When I moved in, the place was bare except for a small wooden table and two mismatched chairs. I liked it that way. I opened the windows to let the air move through the rooms. Curtains fluttered like quiet applause. For the first few days, I unpacked slowly. I placed Arthur's photograph on the mantel, his smile steady as always. Beside it, I laid the silver bracelet, polished now, though the small crack remained. I didn't hide it. I wanted it there. A scar turned into decoration. Each morning, I walked to the lake's edge with a cup of tea. The water changed colors with the sky, sometimes gray, sometimes gold. The stillness wasn't empty anymore. It was full of life I hadn't noticed before. Ducks glided across the surface. The breeze carried the scent of rain and pine needles. I found peace in small rituals again, folding laundry, boiling soup, tending to a pot of lavender on the windowsill. I stopped rushing through chores. I let them anchor me. Every motion was quiet, deliberate, mine. One afternoon, while I was sweeping the porch, I heard a familiar voice call from the gate. "You found yourself a view, Olivia." Mrs. Ramirez stood there, holding a basket of lemons from her garden. She looked exactly as she always had, firm, warm, wise. I smiled. "And you found me again." She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the space. "It suits you," she said. "There's peace here." "There is," I agreed. "Not the kind I used to chase, the kind that stays when everyone else leaves." We sat at the table by the window. The light fell across the wood, painting her face in soft amber. I poured us tea, chamomile, her favorite. She noticed the bracelet on my wrist immediately. "You kept it," she said. "I did," I replied, turning my wrist slightly so the light caught the silver. "Arthur gave it to me as a promise. I used to think it meant belonging to someone. Now I think it meant belonging to myself." She smiled knowingly. "You've come far, Olivia." I looked out at the water, far enough to understand that love isn't sacrifice, it's clarity. For a while, we just sat in companionable silence, the kind that doesn't need to fill itself. The lake shimmered. A heron stood at the edge, still and patient. Mrs. Ramirez sipped her tea. "Have you spoken to him?" I shook my head. "No, and I'm not waiting for a call anymore." "You don't have to," she said. "Sometimes silence is mercy." Her words rested gently between us. After she left, I sat by the lake until the sun began to dip. The reflection of the sky rippled across the surface, turning everything to liquid gold. I took off the bracelet and held it in my palm. It felt warm, alive, almost pulsing with memory. I whispered, "I'm not going back to who I was." The wind stirred the leaves. Somewhere a bell rang faintly across the water. I put the bracelet back on, not as an heirloom or a chain, but as a completed circle. The nights in the lake house were quiet, but never lonely. I started writing letters to Arthur again, not to grieve him, but to thank him. "Dear Arthur, you were right. I could stand on my own. It just took me longer to believe it. The house is small, but it holds peace. Mrs. Ramirez visits. The ducks come at dawn. The water knows my reflection now, and I've stopped apologizing for taking up space. If silence is an answer, then I think this is what it says. I'm still here." I sealed the letter and placed it inside a wooden box by the window. I didn't need to send it anywhere. It was enough to have said it. A week later, I repainted the front door, a pale shade of blue. When the paint dried, I stood back and looked at it, smiling. Doors, I realized, aren't just for leaving. They're for returning to yourself. On my final evening before winter arrived, Mrs. Ramirez came by again. She brought candles and a jar of soup. We sat outside wrapped in shawls, watching the sun sink behind the trees. She looked at me and said softly, "You look like someone who has forgiven the world." I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "Not forgiven, understood." We clinked our teacups lightly in the golden light. As the wind cooled, I reached for the bracelet again, tracing its smooth edge with my thumb. "I didn't come back to the past," I said. "Half to her, half to the fading sun. I came back to myself." Mrs. Ramirez smiled. "Then you've found what most people spend their whole lives looking for." I looked out at the lake one last time before dusk. The surface was still, perfect. No ripples, no storms, just reflection. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to hold my breath. The world, in all its quiet imperfection, was finally enough. The light dimmed, the tea cooled, and peace settled like soft dust around us. When the first stars appeared, Mrs. Ramirez touched my hand. "To new beginnings," she said. "To come home," I answered.